We want to give a huge welcome to all the virtual members of Columbine United Church. Look at this, I'm wearing a robe on a Sunday morning. That's because we usually film the 10 o'clock service, the contemporary service, but today, because of the Bronco game, we're filming the 8 o'clock service, so you get to see me in all my attire. It's great to have you. Those of you who are around the world who join us, some of you across the United States, some of you on the other side of the pond, especially our men and women in uniform, those of you who watch the service as a way of checking in and grounding yourself into the community of faith. It is so good to have you with us. Let's give these people a warm Columbine welcome. So I need to grab my Bible, my glasses out. Is that me? I still have my microphone in my ear, so maybe that wasn't me. So that was going to be a good scripture passage. And the sermon that went along with that was going to be a good sermon. But things happen. And last night we had a death in the church. Ed Hollingshead died. And I know. And when you're a pastor at a church for 30 plus years, when parishioners die, it's more than just parishioners. They're friends that die. We form many long-lasting friendships with people over the years. And so when Ed passed away, well, we knew at some point it was coming. I'm going to talk a little bit about Ed. It was still kind of a sucker punch. And literally, I had just opened my laptop yesterday to finish my sermon preparation. I usually begin right at about 5 and end about 10 o'clock when Jane called me and told me that Ed had passed away. So I have since learned over the years that when a death happens on a Saturday night, that I used to ask myself, where would the congregation have me spend my time? Would the congregation have me spend my time working on my sermon, or would the congregation have me spend my time with the family of someone who had just lost a loved one, which might then compromise the Sunday morning sermon? And I used to kind of wrestle with that, and now I don't wrestle with that. I know that, of course, you would want me to go spend my time, my Saturday time, and that if that compromised the Sunday sermon, so be it. That instead we count on good music, count on beautiful hymns, and count on a beautiful afternoon in the Bronco game this afternoon to kind of carry us. And so this Sunday isn't what I had thought it was going to be. In fact, when I told Justin and Jane the sermon idea back in my office, Justin said, well, that's going to be a Hail Mary, to use a football term. So I'm going to throw a Hail Mary. You all run down to the end zone, and somebody please catch the ball. All right? So when I was driving home from the nursing home late last night, thinking, what am I going to preach on? Because the sermon title is, it's like, what if? Our whole Epiphany sermon series is what if. And the topic for today is, well, what if we really follow Jesus? What if we really follow Jesus? And since I just didn't have the heart to preach what I was going to preach, I said, so what are you going to say? And what passage are you going to use? And this passage came to me from John's Gospel. And I found it very profound when I got home and read it, the last line of the passage. The setting is this. It's the last chapter of John's Gospel. Jesus has appeared now 3 times to the disciples. This last time, they are out fishing. It's early morning at dawn, and he is shown up on the beach, and he yells at them to cast their nets on the other side of the boat, and they haul in a huge bunch of fish, and they wonder, who is this person on the beach? Simon Peter realizes that it's Jesus. He jumps off the boat. Out of the boat, he goes tearing into the beach to see Jesus. The disciples join him. They haul up their fish, and Jesus cooks them breakfast, and they're amazed at who he is and what's going on. And then Peter and Jesus have this conversation where 3 times Jesus says to Peter, Peter, do you love me? And Peter says, of course I love you. And this is a lot of scholars believe that this is how Jesus is kind of restoring his relationship with Peter, since Peter denied him 3 times. This is Jesus' way of asking Peter, do you love me? 3 times. His way of helping kind of Peter overcome that sense of denial. And then right after that, Jesus says this passage, and this passage has long served for me about what it means to follow Jesus. Listen for these words. Jesus says, "Very truly, I tell you, when you were young, you used to fasten your own belt and go wherever you wished. But when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will fasten a belt around you and take you where you do not wish to go." He said this to indicate the kind of death by which he would glorify God. After this, he said to Peter, "Follow me." I'm going to read the passage again. Listen. Jesus says to Peter, "Very truly, I tell you, when you were younger, you used to fasten your own belt and go wherever you wished. But when you become more mature, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will fasten a belt around you and take you where you do not wish to go." He said this to indicate the kind of death by which he, Peter, would glorify God. After this, he said to him, "Follow me." And here the passage ends, and may God bless these words as I seek to apply them to our lives. So follow Jesus. What if we follow Jesus? What if we follow Jesus? What if we took all the risks that were necessary? What if we set aside public opinion and what other people might think about us and really follow Jesus? Going maybe where people might think we're foolish or silly or stupid. But we want to go because he has asked us to follow him. Would we do it? What if we follow Jesus? So this is a continuation of the sermon series, this Epiphany sermon series on what if, and there is no keynote today. There is no keynote. I just didn't have time to put together a keynote. I got up early this morning to it was really funny. I got up early this morning to write some kind of sermon outline. And my computer locked up. Literally, locked up. And I finally got it unfrozen, but by then it was time to go feed the horses, take a shower, get in the car, and go. And I kind of kept on hearing, "Trust the force, Luke. Trust the force." And so I'm kind of like, I am really flying by the seat of my pants. I know what I want to say about what it means to follow Jesus. And this passage is a powerful passage for me because, the passage says, when you were younger, you put on your own belt and you went where you wanted to go. And isn't that true? When we're younger, we have the world by the tail and we know what it is that we're going to do. And, it's like, I'll never forget when we were graduating from high school. As seniors, we all got T-shirts, and I'm going to bend the language here just a little bit. Excuse me. Hell is a good word. I can say it in church. But we had T-shirts that said, "Go to hell, world, I'm a senior." We were 18 years old. We put on our belt and we knew exactly what we were going to be doing. And as you become more mature, you realize life doesn't allow you to do that. That you often have to allow God to fashion a belt around you and take you where you would rather not want to go. And this is what I was thinking about when I was driving home after sitting with Ed and Marion, waiting for Drinkline Mortuary to come pick up Ed's body. Because this whole situation with Ed and Marion is actually someplace I'd rather not have gone. And that definitely Ed and Marion would rather not have gone. And I know many of you do not know this story. Some of you do, most of you don't. So I'll tell you the story of what happened to Ed Hollingshead 7 years ago. It was on New Year's Eve, New Year's Day, that Ed suffered a brain aneurysm. And I've checked with Marion, she's given me carte blanche approval to share this story. He had a brain aneurysm, a brain bleed, and they had to do emergency surgery. And he survived the surgery. And I was down at Presbyterian St. Luke's Hospital with him and was able to talk with him. He couldn't see real well, but he was able to communicate, and the surgery went very well. And then he suffered a major stroke. major stroke. It's been a 7-year journey. All of a sudden, I'm kind of feeling it. And I'll never forget, the family was in the room with Ed, and in the intensive care unit at Presbyterian St. Luke's, the doctors have a separate kind of table out front behind the rooms, and you can kind of see what the doctors are doing. And Ed's surgeon came out, and they put his x-rays up in the light, and the doctors looked at each other and shook their heads. And they came into the family and they said that Ed is gone. That Ed is gone. Ed is gone. He was completely brain dead. Except for the bottom of his brain stem. The bottom of his brain stem. And what this meant is that though Ed was gone, his body was very much alive. And the bottom of his brainstem meant that his body would continue to function. And he would breathe on his own. His hair would grow, his fingernails would grow. His every single bodily function would continue on. He would look the same, he would look like Ed Hollingshead, but what made him him, was gone. I have a consulting psychiatrist that I work with, that I present every type of case. It's my way of holding myself accountable, making sure I'm doing things ethically and appropriately. I sat down and presented the case to Dr. Fine, and Dr. Fine said, "Welcome to the most complicated thing you're ever going to deal with in your entire ministry." Now, isn't this interesting, what it means to follow Jesus? I think that we wish we could put a belt on and go exactly where we wanted to go, but rarely does that happen, as I said. Life dishes it out to us, does it not? My son yesterday, Gabe, was given a pink slip. At 22 years of age, he realized you don't necessarily get to put on the belt and go wherever you want to go. And sometimes life says, here's a pink slip, here's a layoff, here's a divorce, here is foreclosure, here is diabetes, here is MS, here is cancer, here is a stroke. And we are left wrestling with, how are we going to be faithful in the middle of a situation like this? What does it mean to follow Jesus when life just goes completely awry? It's easy to follow Jesus when things are going well. And sometimes I was thinking to myself last night and early this morning that one of I think the greatest mistakes that I make as your preacher and your teacher is that I think sometimes I fear that I make following Jesus too easy. People always tell me, you're such a good actor. Let's not confuse being a good actor with being a big ham. I am a big ham. I love getting in front of people. I love making people laugh. And my goal is all the time to inspire you in living. But sometimes I think I fail because I really believe that following Jesus is sometimes one of the most complicated, difficult things that we can ever do. And the disciples had to repeatedly learn this over and over. The passage that I had chosen was a passage earlier in John where the disciples are sitting with Jesus, and Jesus literally offends every single person in the room. Every single person in the room. Jesus offends them. And they all get up and walk out. And Jesus looks at the 12 disciples and he says, "Are you going to go too?" And they go, "Where else are we going to go?" And they said, "We believe that you have the words of eternal life." And it's something I really believe, that Jesus does have the words of eternal life. But that doesn't mean it's going to be easy. And so it is that Marion Hollingshead is now faced with the most challenging issue of her entire life. What to do with Ed? Ed looks like Ed Hollingshead. His eyes open. He breathes on his own. There's no ventilator. Every bodily function, fine. She walks into his room and she does not see a brain-dead husband. She sees her husband. All the doctors are saying, let him go. Let him go. She asks me, Steve, what should I do? Go out for brunch? I said, Marion, it's ultimately your decision, and I'm going to walk with you either way. But I agree with the doctors, let him go. I wonder if that was not the biggest mistake I've ever made in my ministry. And as Marion was wrestling with this decision, she distinctly and clearly heard God tell her, keep him alive. Not once, but twice. Keep him alive. She heard very clearly, I am going to resurrect him. Keep him alive. I am going to resurrect him. She heard it so clearly that she was convinced. And all the doctors thought she was insane. And the pastor was biting his cheek. She heard God. I only thought pastors heard God. Of course not. Every time I stand up here and I tell you that I've heard God speak to me, I think to myself, oh my God, now they're going to really think I'm nuts. But who am I to say that God would not speak to her in the middle of this situation? And so with every single ounce of effort that Marion Hollingshead had, she threw into keeping Ed alive. Every place she went, every single doctor told her, Mrs. Hollingshead, you know he's not there. She goes, yes, I know he's not there. But I'm keeping him alive. It was so crazy that it began to make perfect sense to me. Because when you stop and you think about through the Bible, there was a lot of people who God asked them to do crazy things that everybody thought was insane. I've always felt bad for old Noah. What are you doing, Noah? Building a boat? A boat. A boat out here in the middle of the plains. You're building a boat. Why are you building a boat? To put all the animals in the world on. To use the old Bill Cosby skit. Why? Because it's going to rain. 40 days. It's going to snow 27 inches in Central Park. But yet Noah strived to be faithful. Thought about Abraham and Abraham's family. Abraham, where are you going? I've been told to leave. By who, God? Where are you going? I don't know. You're just leaving. Really, this morning I thought of Mary. You're what? You're pregnant. You're what? Do you know what this means? Honey, this means you're going to be stoned to death. You agreed? Do you know what this means? The shame that you have brought upon you and you have brought upon our family? And person after person after person in the Bible wrestles what it means to be faithful in the middle of crazy circumstances. And I want you to think right now, where might it be that God is asking you to be faithful in a crazy circumstance? Well, what did Marion wrestle with then? I'll never forget one time she was at Porter Hospital and she was literally jumped by the ethics committee. I mean, she was walking down the hall, they called her in, and there was a whole panel, and they said, if you bring him into this hospital one more time, we're going to hire an attorney, and we're going to turn you over to social services, and we're going to remove the rights that you have as his wife for care. What does it mean to be faithful when God has asked us to do something just other people think absurd? Well, one Sunday I got up here and I talked to us about 2.5 years ago. I talked about to the congregation that I felt as though God had given me the gift of healing and to work with healing and work with people's energy to bring about a sense of healing, kind of using a Reiki style. Thought I was going out on a limb until Marion Hollings had said, hey, why don't you put your money where your mouth is, your spiritual money where your mouth is? I have my husband who God said he's going to heal. You just said you're a healer. How about coming and healing my husband? Huh? What? I felt as though I had sidestepped this situation long enough, so I decided to dive in. Why not? And there began the journey that changed my life. I saw the movie The Diving Bell and the Butterfly. If you have not seen the movie or read the book The Diving Bell and the Butterfly, that's a movie you've got to watch. Because it was about a very smart, genius man who had this horrific disease that in every other instance of people who had this disease, it killed their body and it killed their brain. You actually lock up. The body locks up, the brain locks up, and they become brain dead and die. And this wife was bent on keeping her husband alive, on the outside hope that he was there. And people told her she was insane and she was nuts. But she wanted to give him just what if he's there? And do you know, one time a nurse noticed his eye blink. Everybody said he was brain dead. They noticed his eye blink. They asked him a question, a yes and no question, and his eye blinked again. Long story short, he was in there and he was communicating. He was desperately trying to communicate. And do you know, because they hung in there with him, he ended up writing a book by blinking his eye. He wrote the book, The Diving Bell and the Butterfly. One eye blink at a time for each letter of the alphabet. And a nurse who was patient enough to sit there with him to allow him to communicate. Then there came the book about the brain surgeon. I can't remember the name of the book all of a sudden. Who died? Who was brain dead? And he came back. And everybody discounted the book. But if you sit there and you listen to the doctor and tell his story, it's quite compelling. he has a vision and experience of the afterlife. I would sit and I would think about these things as I would go and sit beside Ed's bed and pray. And sit with Marion. And I would hear Marion say, God told me to keep him alive. And I began to think to myself, what if he's there? Just this teeny, tiny percentage chance that maybe he's there in such a way that he's there spiritually, that transcends medical understanding. What if? What if? Who am I to abandon Marion? Who are we to abandon Marion? Who are we to abandon Ed? And so we didn't. You didn't. I was recruiting people to support Marion. As pastors, we walked a very faithful journey with her. And do you know, over the past months, I began to believe he was starting to communicate. On Tuesday, I went home and I told my wife, who I've been talking with her the entire journey, I think he might be. I talked with my psychiatrist. Am I insane? He said, we need to know that the vastness of the world and how the world works and how God works supersedes what we know about medicine, and psychology, and spirituality. My psychiatrist is Jewish. He says, you know, it's your people who believe in miracles. What are you going to do with it? I don't know, throw Hail Mary, I guess. What does it mean to be faithful? And so last night, God made good on his promise. And Ed Hollingshead was resurrected. Jesus said, I am the resurrection and the life. Though you die, yet shall you live. What does it mean to have someone else fasten a belt and take you where you would rather not go? I believe that's what it means to follow Jesus. Let us pray. So, loving God, we humbly stand before you. We remember a church member of ours who is grieving this morning. grieving in the same way that so many of us grieve at the loss of loved ones. We cling to your promises of resurrection. We cling to your promises in the midst of the complexity of life where really things just don't make sense, and yet you have asked us to be faithful, and so we strive to be faithful, O God. And so we ask that you be with us. Pour upon us your beautiful, incredible, enlightening Spirit. Fill our hearts to overflowing as we say together the prayer that your Son taught us. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, for thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever.